Well, I think first of all, whether President Trump can persuade Putin to accept this peace deal is one thing. President Trump hasn't managed to do that over almost a year of his presidency, despite saying that he'd end the war within 24 hours of coming into the White House. So what President Trump says and what he does are not always exactly the same. The idea of having a demilitarized zone, again, from a military perspective, I'm not entirely sure how this would work. Is Trump thinking about putting US troops in between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces? Who knows? And of course, also, the Russians have said that security guarantees like this would be, in effect, Ukraine during NATO, by default, which is a big red line for the Russians as well. I think the concern that you've highlighted there is a major one, that actually this demilitarized zone, if the Russians do agree to pull back, will probably give them the opportunity to regroup. And it was only reported on the BBC earlier this week that the Russians have lost more soldiers in the last 9 months. The rate of loss has been higher than any time throughout the war. And we know that the Russian military is struggling. We know they're struggling to get more manpower. So, a pause in the fighting for a year or so would, I think most people who look at this closely, the Russians would take advantage of that to reconstruct their forces and rebuild. Having said all that, I think everybody in the world is desperate for peace, except for Putin and the Russians. And if Trump can persuade Putin for peace, then that would be a major step forward. But unfortunately, it all seems to be on Russian terms at the moment. And what has been offered, this 95% plan, might seem reasonable to you and I, but the Russians, no doubt, will try and squeeze more and more out of it. And ultimately, of course, Putin's aim, as he's always stated, is to subjugate the whole of Ukraine, and that is far from achieving that. So whether Trump has some really powerful levers that he can pull to force Trump to force Putin to agree, that is not entirely clear. But until the Russians engage in this latest peace deal, it's going to be very difficult to see, what the validity behind it is and the likelihood of success.
Let's also cover a situation on the ground and successful Ukrainian operations in the city of Kupiansk. As of today and as of this week, it seems like Ukrainians have managed to push back most of Russian troops out of the city of Kupiansk. Also, President Zelensky made the surprise visit to the city. What is your assessment of military situation in Kupiansk, and how did Ukrainians manage to successfully push back Russians out of the city?
I think the situation in Kupiansk is similar to other places, particularly sort of areas of Petrovsk down in the Donbass as well, where in the last few weeks in particular, the last couple of months, actually, Ukraine forces, very much supported by Ukraine special forces, have recovered a lot of ground that the Russians have taken, in the preceding few months. And I think this is a positive. One thing, it shows that the Russian military is really struggling, and the losses that have been encountered, a lot because the Russian conscripts who are going to the front at the moment are very poorly trained, very poorly led, whereas the Ukrainian forces have managed to concentrate their forces. They've managed to train and use some good tactics and principles of war to be able to overcome the Russian conscripts. So I think it is a very positive thing, and particularly in key towns like Kupiansk, this makes a very considerable difference. And hopefully Trump is fully aware of all this, that actually, it is Ukraine forces that have the upper hand at the moment. And it is not the Russians who are about to pile through and take the Donbass, far from it. In fact, it's the other way around. So at the moment, I think Ukraine is on the front foot, as we'd say, is in a position of strength. And that should be recognized in any peace deals moving forward. And let's hope that continues. And also Ukraine's deep battle attacking shadow fleet tankers in the Black Sea, striking targets deep into Russia, particularly on the oil infrastructure and elsewhere, are really having a considerable impact on the Russian economy. And Russian people are getting more and more aware of what is happening in the state of their economy, and are beginning to question in a much deeper degree the actual war itself. So it would, maybe a month or so ago, or 2 months ago, one would have assessed that the Russian forces had the upper hand. I think that is different now, and Ukraine is making great progress. And hopefully that might be a factor to get the Russians to agree to the peace deal that President Trump thinks is almost done.
Let's also cover the most brave and daring Ukrainian special operations and these deep strikes, just to sum up the main results of this work by Ukrainian armed forces. So Ukrainian underwater drones have struck Russian Kilo-class submarine in the naval base of Novorossiysk. This submarine was used to launch missiles on Ukraine. Also, for the first time, Ukrainian drones operated by Ukrainian special services have struck Russia's oil tanker in the Mediterranean, so more than 1,000 miles from Ukraine. Moreover, another Russian general was killed in Moscow. What is your highlight of this year of another year of Ukrainian resistance and special operations against Putin's war machine?
I think the Ukraine special operations, if you highlighted there, have been dramatic and really excellent. And I'm sure the rest of military forces around the world are trying to learn about it. The destruction of the Russian nuclear submarine was an extraordinary operation, and although a low-level attack, it's a strategic impact. This is apparently a submarine costing $300 to $400 million, a key submarine for launching Russian cruise missiles, apparently in a safe Russian harbor. It has been destroyed by underwater drones. In a similar fashion, a tanker's been struck in the Mediterranean, many miles away from any sort of Ukrainian forces. There are also reports of a Russian ship carrying nuclear reactors for North Korea that has sunk in the Mediterranean, believed to have been hit by a torpedo or some sort of underwater drone. Nobody is suggesting, or not directly suggesting, this is Ukraine Special Forces, but the reach is phenomenal, and the intelligence to be able to do this, again, is phenomenal. So I think when you look at the way that two sides are operating at the moment, on the one side, the Russians are operating in a very simple fashion, just using soldiers really as cannon fodder, and making very little progress but huge amounts of casualties. Whereas the Ukrainian forces are really at the tip of the spear, the tip of the technology, doing these incredible long-range attacks. We saw Operation Spider's Web many months ago now, where Ukraine Special Forces and drones attacked strategic Russian bombers deep into Russia. But that really set the tone for these type of operations. And a number of very senior Russian generals have been taken out as well. Again, not directly attributed to Ukraine Special Forces, but that is the sort of inference. So I think it is all having a big impact. And I expect, that is why Russian leadership like Sergei Lavrov and others close to Putin, are really trying to shape the narrative so that people believe that Russia is in the ascendancy. But no, I think all of us military commentators in the West and part of NATO are incredibly impressed by what Ukraine forces have been able to do. And a small country like Ukraine holding and pushing a massive military like Russia back really is a fantastic credit to the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people.